in the context of America, when you have a lot of political power on the other side of organized labor and a lot of financial power on the other side of organized labor, we need to be as organized as the people that are trying to fight us. And right now we're not.
With us, Hamilton Nolan, freelance labor reporter extraordinaire, former staff writer for In These Times. And yeah, Hamilton, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, man. Love you guys. Shout out to you guys for doing this.
Hey, we honored to be able to do that. I am a little bit disappointed, though. You have broken your promise to me.
What's that? Oh, I was supposed to wear my suit.
Yeah, you told me that you would wear your suit that we've got on this thumbnail.
Yeah, I feel like you pranked me a little bit by using the one photo of me in a suit on the internet that I can't delete somehow. So you got me. I give it to you.
Well, all right. Right.
That is my shtick. Yeah, it's I spent I was a staff writer in These Times for 2020 and 2021, and then I left and spent most of 2022 reporting and writing a book.
Sorry, Hamilton. The chat is going crazy.
It's resolved.
It's resolved. Okay.
Yeah.
Now we're back. Okay.
Sorry
about that.
All right. Anyhow, yeah, I was a staff writer in These Times. Then I left and I spent 2022 reporting and writing a book about the labor movement, which is coming out in February, by the way. It's called The Hammer. And then when I finished that earlier this year, I did, in fact, start a Substack, and I've been freelancing. And, also the media itself is more or less collapsing. But as you all know, and as you all live, the independent media is flourishing. So now we're both part of the independent media. Congratulations to all of us.
There you go. You much more than us. This is, we are not brave enough to, or at least I'm not brave enough to take the dive and try to do this like as my job. I would be like just an anxiety-induced mess trying to do this for work. So I mean that doing this, like I had respect. I've obviously always had respect for like journalists and people that do media as a job, but doing this just as like a side gig, right? That this is all volunteer. We don't take any money from the project. All the money that we get goes into, investments in the project. So labor outside of myself and Adam and like material costs and stuff like that. But yeah, it is really difficult to like make a living in this line of work.
Yeah, I mean, look, you all are part of the media just as much as anybody. You're more maybe generous than most people in the media, but yeah, I mean, there's like journalism and like making good journalism, and then there's making a living from journalism, which is an entirely separate question. That not that long ago there was kind of a flourishing online media and a lot of jobs and stuff like that. Especially in New York, and today that's not so much true. The model has kind of collapsed. So everybody's kind of figuring out how to make it work and what the next thing is going to be.
Yeah. So one of the things that you do, I think probably more than any labor reporter, is that you put out a lot of opinion pieces, like big idea kind of stuff, and I really like that because we don't have enough public discussion of big ideas, quote unquote, right? And one of the things, I believe it was you that put this out, but when I went to look for it, I couldn't find this piece that I think you wrote, but maybe it wasn't you. But it was the thesis was that we need to have a fund that is not a strike fund, but it's like an organizing workers relief fund. So like a fund that would replace a worker's income if they were fired for organizing. And the real kind of ingenious thing about that is that if we've got a fund like that, and then we pursue an unfair labor practice charge with the NLRB, and we're able to get the person's job back with back wages, then we can just replenish the fund with those back wages, and in the interim, the person can be basically a full-time union organizer. Was that you?
Yeah. I did write a piece a year or two ago about how we need a big national strike fund, I think is what I called it. But I mean, it's kind of a similar idea in the sense of like, we don't have a collective strike fund for the whole labor movement, you know, and if you're lucky enough to be in a big union that has a big strike fund like UAW, you know, big relative to other strike funds at least.
Right.
That's one thing. And if you're in, you know, a smaller union, or even my union, the Writers Guild, doesn't, you know, with the whole time those people were on strike, they weren't getting strike pay because the union doesn't have those kind of assets, you know.
Right.
So it would be great if there was like an overarching strike fund for the whole labor movement that we could collectively invest in, could collectively and strategically, you know, deploy those resources to the strikes where they were needed. And, you know, I feel like that's kind of just one example of like the things that we could do if the labor movement was able to act in a national coordinated way, which it's really not yet, but maybe one day.
Right. And the thing about the worker organizing relief fund that I thought was really kind of that we don't have, you know, we don't have like a national strike fund, but even within unions, we don't really have like dedicated funds to support workers who are retaliated against for organizing, right? We just don't really think about that as something to have a dedicated pot of money for when a worker is fired. So when a worker is fired, you know, maybe they get some money out of the general fund that the union is willing to donate to them, or maybe they have like a GoFundMe or something like this. But if it's not like an actual sanctioned strike, we don't really have money for that anywhere.
Yeah, it's a great point, you know, and obviously that dissuades people from organizing. I know the Starbucks campaign did have a dedicated fund like that coworker.org helped to set up. But it was exactly what you're talking about, which was, you know, as the Starbucks campaign was going on for that whole year, you saw workers all over the place getting fired, you know, and there was like, you would see this whole procession of GoFundMes on Twitter, you know, a worker somewhere would get fired and they would try to promote this GoFundMe. And, you know, even if you're like a sympathetic person and you're trying to support that, like you can't give, there's no way for an individual to give money to enough GoFundMes to support all these workers. So like they did in fact build a dedicated fund to help support those workers in a more systematic way. But yeah, it's a really good point that you're making because, and you know, and a lot of those people aren't members of the union yet, obviously. Right. So you can't be a member of the union until you win that first contract. And that's, you know, that's the most dangerous part is before you get to that point. That's when the workers are getting fired. So yeah, to be able to have some resources to like protect those workers. And when you go into organized workers to be able to say, we have some kind of safety net for you in case you get fired doing this would obviously make it easier to organize, especially in the most hostile places, you know.
Especially if we could, like, as we are like at the jump, right? Like, hey, you know, we're organizing, and if something happens to you, we've got this many millions of dollars set aside to replace your wages if something happens, if you get your hours cut in retaliation, or if you get fired or something like that. If we're able to point to that and like have a certain amount of legitimacy and that would really, I think, embolden people. And within unions, that's certainly an important thing to cultivate. But but you know, being able to do that nationally and internationally with across the labor movement is another really important thing. And the reason that we can't do that is because basically the National Federation of Unions, the AFL-CIO, just does not have really any authority, right? Talk to us about the structural problems within the labor movement that make it difficult to do these big ideas, these kind of the things that are that need centralized bodies for strategic thinking and funding and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I think about a lot, and it drives me crazy a lot because even if you talk to anybody who's like newly come into the labor movement, the people who are the most enthusiastic about the labor movement, the people who have just organized, and I had this experience when I came into the labor movement, and I think it's a pretty common experience, is like you realize the potential of organized labor to change America and to change a lot of people's lives. And you start coming up with these ideas and being like, we should do this, and we should do this, and we should do this. And then as you learn about the actual structure of unions in America and how they're set up and how they're run and where the power lies and how they work with one another or don't work with one another, you start to see all these roadblocks. And it's all these structural roadblocks that hold us back from being able to exercise the big national ideas that we need to exercise. And the AFL-CIO, which you mentioned, is, it's the biggest union coalition in America. It has something like 60 unions in it, minus some of the biggest unions in America, which have left out of frustration over the years. But essentially, the AFL-CIO is a coalition of all the unions, but it itself does not have the power to tell the unions to do anything. I mean, it is a voluntary coalition. And so we think of the AFL-CIO as being the center of organized labor, the heart of the labor movement, the most powerful group in organized labor. But the reality is it can't tell any unions to do anything. And so when you look at something like when John Sweeney was elected head of the AFL-CIO in the 90s, and he came in and said, hey, we need to get all the unions to spend more money on organizing, right? Which is probably the most obvious change that unions could and should make in America. Essentially the unions were like, no, we don't want to, and that was it. And that was, it's a longer story than that, but that is the heart of how it went. So at kind of the center of organized labor in America, there's not really an organization, meaning there's not a powerful organization. And so I really feel like, as much as we love to talk about this moment that we're in and all the energy that's in the labor movement right now, what I really, really look for and hope comes about is that you start to see large-scale coordination between the unions, multi-union coalitions. Like if we're going to organize Amazon, that's going to be a multi-union coalition. Let's see an effective example of that happening. All these big ideas, like let's have a national organizing fund, let's have a national strike fund. All these big ideas, man, I really want to see some of this coordination between the unions to kind of show us all that, like, labor leaders themselves are thinking in a national way, and they're thinking about this as a movement and not just their own union. And so I think there are some glimmers of that here and there, but that's really like the next frontier that we need to see to give us the kind of power that we need in the context of America, when you have a lot of political power on the other side of organized labor and a lot of financial power on the other side of organized labor. We need to be as organized as the people that are trying to fight us. And right now we're not.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
What do you think it would take to get there, to a place where we are, where we have that sort of ability to think strategically and centrally across unions and across the country and across the globe?
I think that one thing that my book is about is I wrote about Sarah Nelson, who's the head of the Flight Attendants Union, and is a really sort of dynamic and exciting labor leader, and her kind of struggle with the decision about whether or how to try to run for the head of the AFL-CIO. I think that if the AFL-CIO had a very, powerful, charismatic leader that also had a vision, the first thing that we need leaders with the vision. And that is something that we lack at kind of the highest levels of the labor movement in a lot of cases. So I think that, the most practical way for us to start walking down that road is that the handful of big labor leaders in America who I think do have a vision and who do think about the labor movement as a movement and who do want to see us do bigger things, those leaders are going to kind of have to come together themselves and start taking the first steps, And when I saw, for example, UAW and Sean Fain come out after their strike and say publicly, hey, we want other unions to line up your contract expiration dates with us for May 1st, 2028, so that we could potentially exercise a huge, the power of a huge strike across the country, across a lot of unions on that date. That's an example of, I think, a labor leader and a union. It's not just one guy. I mean, it's a union with a vision for a broader labor movement, trying to take some concrete steps in that direction. So stuff like that is encouraging. But I think it's the reality is that it's going to have to come from those labor leaders themselves. Saying, look, this is not going to come through the AFL-CIO. Like, that's just not the reality. Like, the people who really believe in the labor movement got to get together and do it.
And like you said, that's one of the things that you have written about recently about, the potential and Sean Fain and the potential to do some of this, attempting to converge on like a national plan, so to speak. And you wrote about that for In These Times a couple of days ago is when the article went live. A general strike in 2028 is a uniquely plausible dream. And now, so some people were talking about this on Twitter, and how, general strike, 2028. And I was told by people on Twitter that we don't need to wait that long, and we can just put something up on Reddit right now. Why are you against a general strike right now, Hamilton? Why are you standing in the way of all of these workers going on strike?
Yeah, thank you for that bait question that you're asking me. Look, this is, as like people who are like experienced labor people, love to like sort of cuss out people on Twitter who are like, we need a general strike. We need a general strike. I will say though, in the people on Twitter's defense, like, the impulse that they have, it's an impulse that comes obviously from people who maybe don't have a lot of experience with the reality of how hard it is to organize at a large scale and how hard it is to pull off something like that. But, when you see those things, and these things like pop up pretty regularly, general strike for Gaza, general strike for Black Lives Matter, general strike for the election, general strike for this, what you're seeing is like the sentiment of people who at least understand the possibility of labor power to exercise broader power in society, so like, I try to look at it as a positive thing in the sense of like, this is people who realize that, look, man, a strike and organized labor power is not just about winning a contract for you at work. This is like the path for regular people to exercise power through society on anything that we want, Right. And so I'm gonna refrain from being the labor guy who tries to make fun of people for calling for a general strike. I mean, the reality is like, yeah, that is the energy that we need to harness and be able to channel into a strike. So actually seeing a union like UAW, which is obviously a very serious and a very engaged union, come out and make even this is just a first step, and it remains to be seen. Like, I'm still unclear on how much effort they're going to put into it, basically. And I hope to do a little reporting on that in the near future. But seeing UAW come out is encouraging, and like, we need both, right? We need the regular schmoes in the public who are like, we need a general strike, and we need the labor movement itself to be like, yes, we are going to help you do that.
Right. Well, it is, in 2028, it is really, especially right now with the call from the UAW, a general strike really is a uniquely plausible idea. And so I think it is on, of course, obviously it's on the leadership of, each national and international union to try to, follow Sean Fain's lead. But it's also, on folks like you and me, rank and file members who, may be elected to the bargaining committee of the next contract negotiations to try to do the same thing. And if people across the country pressure their leadership to do that, then that's going to make them, all the more likely to do it. And we have, 4.5 years to do that. That's 4.5 years is a long time.
Right. Absolutely. And, one of the reasons why I think it's exciting in the sense of being actually achievable is that exactly what you said, which is, yes, you should pressure the president or union on this issue to get engaged with this, but also, it's not up to the president or union. If you're in a union, like you said, like, you have a contract. When you were on that bargaining committee and you get in that room and you sit down and make your list of demands, this is one more thing to put on the list, to just say, look, we want our date to be April 30th, 2028 for whatever the next contract is that falls in that window. Just make that the date. It's really that simple. And, I've bargained some contracts, and I think that people who bargain a lot of contracts will tell you that, like, getting the date is not usually that hard of a win. I mean, you can get that, the company will give that to you. Generally speaking, like, your boss doesn't care if the contract expires in April or May or June. Like, if you go in and you're like, we want April 30th, like, there's a good chance you can get it. And so start doing it, start doing it wherever you're at. If you're in a union, put it on the list and then scale it up from there.
Exactly. And so what I had in mind, basically for talking to you is just, I went through some of the recent articles that you wrote, and I want to talk about them. And one of them that I really liked, because this is something that, this is another kind of big idea that I think that folks in labor should be talking more about. And that's management rights and what should be ours. So this is on your Substack, thinking bigger about what should be ours, management rights and other fictions. Talk to us about what's the thesis here of this piece, and what do you think folks should be doing about it?
Yeah, that was also inspired by the UAW strike. I mean, the UAW strike was so interesting because there were so many aspects of it that I think are worth talking about. The tactics were interesting and the way they did it was interesting. But, one of the things that was interesting about it was that they won some things in that strike that are not typically things that unions win, such as the reopening of a factory that had been shut down, and the right to strike over plant closures, and things like that hinted at the fact that, like, the union was able to go in and just put things on the table because they had power. Typically when you bargain union contracts, companies want to make it a situation where they say, they want to have a very rigid box and say, here are the things that we're going to negotiate. A, B, and C, wages and working conditions and hours and overtime and the typical things. And employers want to say that's all it is, that those are the boundaries of what we can negotiate, and that's it. And a tool that they use to help them keep that rigid box is the management rights clause, which has become a standard thing in a lot, if not most, union contracts, which is basically just a clause that says, everything that is not specifically outlined in this contract is the right of management to decide.
Right.
And specifically, you know, they're concerned with like management's ability to manage the company. So they don't want there to be any confusion that the union is going to think that you can go in and start telling the company, maybe you should invest your money differently. Maybe you should make, you know, different management decisions. Maybe you should deploy your capital differently. Things that management thinks of as like sacrosanct rights, their right to control the company. You know, so management is very keen on saying, you, the workers, will give you your wages, we'll give you your little 401k and stuff like that that's in the contract. And outside of that, you can't tell us anything. And I think what UAW sort of demonstrated with some of the stuff that they just won is that, you know, that is a fiction. That is made up. Like, that didn't come down from God. That's just something that makes life easier for companies. And the reality of labor power for any union anywhere is that you can get whatever you can win. You can get whatever you're strong enough to take. And so seeing a union like UAW, you know, go in and say, you have to reopen a factory, go in and say, you're going to allow us to strike over plant closures, you know, that's something that the company would much prefer to say, this is our right and it has nothing to do with the union. And that is what your company will tell you. But it's not true. It's just what management wants. And so I think that, you know, a good first step is just the realization among all of us who are in unions that, look, you can get whatever you can take. You can put anything on the table in a negotiation. And if your union is strong enough and if you're willing to strike for it, you know, the horizon of what we can win is a lot bigger than the company wants you to think it is.
And this, it really is sacrosanct. I was having a debate last weekend with a conservative radio host on the station that we are on one of the stations that we are on, the WVNN in Huntsville. I'm not sure if you knew this, but that's where Sean Hannity started. We're on the same radio station that Sean Hannity started on. So one of the morning hosts from that station, we had him on to talk about the UAW deal, and because he said that the UAW deal is a bad deal for America. And really, when we went talking through it, you know, I told him that, you know, the UAW won this for their members, they won this, and then also, look, Toyota workers right here in Huntsville, in our city, in Alabama, got nearly a 10% raise because of this. They'd already gotten 2 raises earlier in the year. There's no shot that they would have gotten a nearly 10% raise on top of the other 2 raises that they got earlier this year, but for the UAW, and they cut their progression in half from 8 years to 4 years and all of this. And so, you know, so I'm like, how could you say that this is a bad deal for America? This seems like great for America. And on top of all of that, all the gains that each worker got, the UAW created like 5,000 jobs in this deal. I mean, that's huge. That is huge. And basically, there wasn't a single thing that he said individually, this is bad, or even in total that it was bad. He just had an ideological hang-up with the workers having a say about all of this. And I literally asked him, I was like, and I asked him that. I was like, so is the deal, is you just don't like workers having a say? And he said yes, like to that question. And it's just baffling to me that ideology has spread, you know, obviously it's on conservative radio, and obviously it's going to be among some conservative leaders, but some union members and contract negotiators have bought into that kind of thinking. They wouldn't say it in those terms, but once you start getting to certain questions about where you starting to get into management rights, even a lot of union members will be like, well, we shouldn't even have those rights. That's not for us to decide because they own the company, not us.
Absolutely, man. And, you know, look, this is the United States of America. I mean, when you start scratching under the surface and you start questioning a lot of the assumptions like what you're talking about, this is stuff that is drilled very, very deep in Americans from the day we're born. I mean, this is, you know, and if you go back and read the history of labor in America from after World War II up until modern times, after World War II, organized labor was very much considered a partner of business. I mean, at least relative to today, right. I don't want to overstate it, but even the Republican candidates for president would say, unions are important and this is all good for America and stuff like that. And there was a very deliberate process over the next 20, 30 years leading up into the 70s and up to the Reagan era, when the business world itself kind of got together and they were like, no, we're not going to have this. We're going to change this. And Reagan was like the culmination of that change and that mentality that you're talking about, that, workers shouldn't have a say in their own companies. I mean, shareholder capitalism, that is what became ascendant, from the Reagan era up to today. And that's still what we're grappling with. And that is, it's a philosophy that a lot of people take for granted and they don't really think about, but it is a philosophy just like any other philosophy. And it's the philosophy that like shareholders are the most important and investors are the most important and executives are the most important. And that's where the profits of the company go, and they don't go to workers. And that's been the reality. And you can look at 100 economic statistics that will show you that that's the reality. It's the rise of inequality, the stagnation of wages, the separation of productivity from wages, all those things are the product of that philosophy saying companies should be completely controlled by executives and they should work completely in service of their investors. And that's how we got to today, where we have people in America who are worth $100 billion, $200 billion, while workers have seen their wages stagnate. So the big economic picture question for organized labor right now is, can we break out of that paradigm? Because it's not just, right, we're not just bargaining contracts here. We're trying to smash that philosophy. We're trying to sort of put back the idea that, a company is not a magical machine that exists to make Elon Musk $200 billion. A company is something that workers should have a very strong part of, or maybe the strongest part in. Workers are arguably the most important stakeholders for a company. That's the kind of thing that we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But I mean, those ideas are so deep in people's mind, especially people who are on the right side of the political spectrum, that a lot of people have never even thought about it.
Right. Some people might even say that workers should have the total controlling capacity of the company, and that they should that workers should own them. I won't necessarily say whether or not we endorse that position. We do. Actually, we endorse that position. But
yes, Soviets even.
There you go. There you go. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.